World-class Tony here, reporting live, bringing you guys my first ever YouTube video, how to start LeetCode as a new programmer. And as you guys can probably see from this Wallace D. Wattles quote on the screen, this is going to be a great video. So first and foremost, quick introduction of myself. I am an author and app developer responsible for eulaexpert.com, the world's first AI-powered legal assistant, free to use, uncensored, no advertisements, and most importantly, no monitoring of end-user data. I'm also an aspiring competitive programmer who has solved a bit over 80 LeetCode problems over the past 4 months or so. And while I'm not an expert programmer, I think that might actually help out my case as it pertains to my relatability towards those who are striving to learn LeetCode for the first time. Because as we're going to see later in this presentation, a lot of the advice that comes from advanced programmers on how to learn LeetCode, it doesn't always benefit the new programmer the same way it would the experienced programmer. So why is LeetCode even important? Well, the first reason it's important is because it's pretty much mandatory in order to pass a job interview nowadays in pretty much any job that requires coding. And employers use LeetCode to filter out candidates. That's really just a fact. And I can attest to that fact because while my resume may have been impressive enough for me to garner the job interview, it wasn't enough for me to get the job. Another reason why LeetCode is important is because it improves one's deeper understanding of computer programming concepts. Now, I know there are some that may argue that LeetCode or studying LeetCode teaches you obscure programming concepts that you'll never use. But the truth is, you don't know exactly what knowledge you may or may not use as a programmer. If you're someone solely interested in LeetCode to get a job and you just want to do the minimum, the problem with that approach is that when you get to your job interview, you're not really going to know which LeetCode problems your interviewer is going to ask you, nor are you going to know which computer programming concepts they may or may not find obscure. So, in my opinion, it's best to prepare as much as possible. The final main reason why I believe LeetCode is important is because it also improves one's overall problem-solving abilities. Solving LeetCode problems just helped me see the world in a really different way. You begin to adopt an overall holistic approach to problem solving in general, and I noticed my overall discipline and efficiency just tightening up since I started LeetCode a few months ago. So moving on to the next slide, how do I start LeetCode as a beginner? Well, the harsh reality of starting LeetCode as a beginner that nobody really tells you in an upfront manner, well, at least nobody ever told me in an upfront manner, is that unless you are a complete genius, as a new programmer, you will not be able to solve new LeetCode problems without looking at the solution first. It does not matter how long you take on the problem, you just don't know the answer yet. And this fact leads us to our next point, which I refer to as the Great LeetCode Paradox, which is that there are only two distinct ways to solve LeetCode problems as a beginner. And those two ways are as follows. You can either A, look at the solution prior to solving the problem, or B, leverage the infinite monkey theorem and hit keys randomly on your keyboard until the problem is solved. This may or may not be a viable option, although I am not quite sure about the time and space complexities of this solution. Oh, and I guess there is a third option here, which I referred to earlier, which is you could just be a genius. The next thing that you're going to want to do as a beginning LeetCoder is to establish a workflow that you can grow out of. So you want to establish a consistent approach that you can apply to solving any LeetCode problem, be it an easy, a medium, or a hard. So I'll give you an idea of mine. First, I code in C++, but you can really choose any language that you like. I really analogize a lot of the computer programming languages to starter Pokemon, in that it really doesn't matter which one you choose. They can all really get the job done. They can all beat the Elite Four, and you can all celebrate victory and glory with any of them. So after deciding which LeetCode problem I'm going to solve, the first thing I want to make sure is that I understand the question and whether or not the question is outside of my scope of current knowledge. Because if so, it's really no shame in selecting a question that's easier to solve. And so the first thing I try to do is solve the problem without code. Like if I truly understand the question, it should be relatively simple to come up with an English version of how you would go about solving the problem. And, people refer to that as pseudocode. So the first thing I do is try to, essentially create the pseudocode in my mind of how I would go about solving the problem. Or if English was the programming language, how would I solve it? After that, I click on the Solutions tab and I search through the various solutions and I find one that resonates with me the most. And that can either be, ideally you want to find the one with the best time and space complexities But what you're going to find is that for a lot of LeetCode problems, the ones with the best time and space complexity are also the ones with the longest lines of code. Not always the case, but generally the case. After I find a solution that resonates with me, I go over to my prompt library and I pull out the following prompt. Hello, Copilot. I am trying to understand this LeetCode problem and was wondering if you can give me a line-by-line explanation of the following code. Please explain it to me in very simple ways as I am new to C++ but am destined to be a great programmer. Please explain each term in detail as well. I would prefer at least a paragraph explanation for each line of code, and please do not write code as a .cpp file. Then, after I'm finished taking notes on each line of code, I insert the next following prompt. Thank you. Can you please translate my provided code line by line into pseudocode for me? Also, please make sure it is a 1-to-1 ratio of lines of text versus lines of code I provide. Then I use pen and paper to accompany each line of text with its relative explanation, and I do this for every line of code. Then, after setting my notes for the problem and a couple of attempts trying to solve the problem on pen and paper, I move to the keyboard to try to solve it there. And if I make any mistake in submitting my solution, be it a compiling error, a wrong answer, or anything like that, I delete the entire solution and start over from scratch. And while I think some people may disagree with this tip, I think this right here is vital if you want to learn from your mistakes and not make the same mistake twice. And this brings me to my next point, which is that pen and paper is your friend. You can't memorize when your thoughts are not well organized. That right there is a quote from Yolan Cohen, who is a world record holder in concrete image memorization, as well as an extremely elite poker player. And Yolan also said in this interview, which I found from the Mechanics of Poker podcast, which you guys should check out if you're interested. He said, and I'm paraphrasing, writing things down is to memory what training is to an athlete. So pen and paper is truly your friend, guys. After hearing this quote, I made it mandatory to use pen and paper prior to typing out any solution. Yolan also mentioned how it is important to keep all of your notes centralized. So I keep all of my solution notes in the same physical notebook. All right, world-class Tony, the main attraction, reporting live once again from the HQ. And this is my favorite place in the world, by the way, right now. And I just wanted to come here to show you guys this good B-roll footage of how I approach LeetCode. So as you can see here, this is how I approach LeetCode. I write the solution down, and then I leverage AI to help me explain each line of code. And as you can see, let me show you another one. Come on, cameraman, get this, cameraman. That's a good B-roll. Shame, man. Come on, pay you. All right, so this is LeetCode 704 binary search. As you can see, 18 lines of code and a lot of explanation. Although these are more of memory improving techniques than they are general coding tips, I believe they will be just as useful in memorizing concepts as they will be in memorizing the solution itself. And this brings me to my next point, which is that there's no shame in scoring a layup. Referring to what I was talking about before when it comes to backing out of a LeetCode problem because either the question or the potential solutions are too complex for your current knowledge base. There are some days where, and I try to solve at least one LeetCode problem a day, Monday through Friday, but there are some days when I'm just not feeling it and I back out of 4, 5, 6 problems in a row in order to find that one problem that I know I can solve with a 3-line solution, and it'll take 20 minutes. And that's okay too, because some progress is better than no progress. And for my last point on this slide, I just wanted to talk about some advice that I would probably avoid as a new programmer looking to start LeetCode. A lot of the advice that I came across when I first started LeetCode was not the most helpful to me as a new programmer. Some people give advice that say you should keep working on the same LeetCode problem for X amount of minutes or X amount of hours until you figure it out, without checking the solution first. However, as I have previously stated in this presentation, if you don't know the answer to a specific LeetCode problem, there's really no amount of time that can pass to allow you to inherit that information. And in order to prove this, let's do a little thought experiment. So imagine if you had to take a test in school today, and that test was in your worst subject, and this test determined whether or not you lived or died. Well, it really wouldn't matter how long it took you to take the test, you would probably fail it anyway, especially without studying. And I believe this thought experiment really analogizes well to LeetCode, or those who are just starting LeetCode, in the sense that in both cases, if you don't know the information beforehand, it's probably just not going to work out. And this brings us to our last slide, which is having gratitude and acknowledging progress. And if I had a Wallace D. Wattles quote at the beginning of this presentation, I had to mention gratitude somewhere in here. So progress is not binary. Progress with LeetCode does not begin when you are able to solve new problems without looking at the solution first. Progress occurs every time you learn something new. I myself have solved over 80 LeetCode problems over the past few months, and I still have not solved a single problem without first looking at the solution, although I believe I am close. So don't be discouraged if you ever think you aren't progressing with LeetCode, because as long as you stay consistent, you will be. A couple of weeks ago, I wrote an article on my LinkedIn titled, "While You Wait, Back to the Drawing Board," in which I acknowledged the anxiety that can sometimes come along with accepting the expectations of others, no matter how small those expectations are. But in my ultimate conclusion of the article, I state, I realize that patience rarely coincides with maintaining the expectations of others. But the truth of the matter is that nobody really cares whether or not I spend the next 5 years studying to become the best engineer/programmer possible, or if I spend that same time being a degenerate. Now, with that being said, I believe it is everyone's duty to make the most of themselves, as that is simply the best way for everyone to help everyone. All right, next point. It's okay if LeetCode is not for you. It's okay if LeetCode is not for you, and it doesn't mean you lack intelligence if you consider LeetCode too difficult to comprehend. I myself thought it was too difficult for me at first, and after reading the first problem and solution, I ended up quitting LeetCode for an entire year before coming back because I simply did not think it was for me. All right, last point for the presentation, and thank you guys for making it this far in this video. I appreciate your time. So my final point is to make sure to enjoy the journey. I personally am a big believer that learning can be fun, so sometimes after submitting a rather challenging LeetCode solution correctly, I'll find myself fist bumping like Kobe after a game winner. I may find myself saying first try after a successful first attempt at a solution. I may even find myself turning on music in order to hit my victory dance, not unlike Victor Cruz. So make sure to try to have fun when it comes to LeetCode, and you might actually find yourself liking the challenge of solving new problems. And that concludes my presentation on how to start LeetCode as a new programmer. If you have made it this far in the video, I wanted to say thank you for your time. I hope if you were considering trying LeetCode, this video helps assist you. And also to anyone out there who is a student or a representative of a company or organization and would like to find out if implementing artificial intelligence would benefit your use case in any way, I am currently offering free consultations until the end of May, and I can be contacted via the email on this slide. Thank you very much for your time.